What I've been finding with vendors that I've been working with is a large chunk of their partner estate or their base of partner accountants are just stalls. Like sometimes it's as much as half, probably more in a couple of outliers. But that's a huge amount of burden to be carrying because all of those partners had to be acquired. They're all on a list of leads that have come in from account X, say that you're or DAS or wherever show it is that you're trying to demonstrate an ROI on, and then they're stuck there. Right, it's not cheap to acquire firms. So this is a real challenge, and what it also means is that there's firms that are stuck there as well. Like they're bought into these ideas, they've signed up for a reason, they're handing money over, but they're not getting the value out of it. So we're going to explore why this is right. It's knowable and it's solvable, and I've fallen foul of a lot of these things over time as well. So um, just because people are signing up, hopefully this is obvious, but it doesn't mean they're going to start using it. There's pieces that are missing, and this is like it felt like a dark art, I suppose, when I fell across these issues to start with. Like, why are they not doing it? Like, why would they sign up and not do it? And as a salesperson, you step back and you go, "Oh, they just don't get it," or whatever. But what I've learned in the last couple of years, there's the reasons for this, right? And it's you can apply logic to it and then you can start to fix it. So I've built a model that I use, and this is just useful for context of how a partner journey should work. So you've got this idea of an activation wheel. You've got to make sure the commercials are there, that it commercially makes sense, that there's a coherent process and journey that you can take people on, and that it's understandable and workable. You've really got to embed change and habit change and workflow change into the practice that you're trying to work with. Otherwise, nothing's going to improve. And then ultimately, you want to try and keep learning and evolving as well. So that's the sort of fundamental that I work on, and you'll sort of notice the patterns here. Um, Before we get right into the things that are actually going wrong, I just want to kind of set the baseline here. So as I mentioned just before we started, this is not about tricking people or accountants into buying more stuff. We're going to take it as read that we're thinking here about people that are motivated. They want to move forwards. There's a great use case for them. We know that we can deliver them value. It's not someone that's just, oh, they're not interested. People that have been scanned, if you've been hanging around the coffee station at Accountex or DAS or whatever and just cheekily scanned people, that's not who we're talking about. And the model on the screen just shows people that have got like low motivation to do something. They find it hard. Those are the hardest people to influence behavior with. And so it's really important that I'm upfront with you here that we're not talking about them, right? This is not taking people that don't want to do it and convincing them to do it. It's just not possible. But we can do a lot of work with this category here. These people that are motivated but just find it a bit too hard, so they drop below this sort of line here. That's what we can work on, and even these guys to get them to move faster as well. So the first killer then is an expectation gap. And I see a lot of vendors and also accountants having a really mismatched expectation about what they're getting into in the first place. On the accountant side, the expectation is that they're going to pay the money over. The solution they're picking up is going to be dead simple. It's probably almost going to implement itself. It's really, intuitive, we would say, as vendors and things like that. And so the expectation is great, like pay the money over, that's the pain, and then life will be better. Obviously, that's not the case. And like, I think back to practical examples in my own life. And when I bought my first reasonably decent camera for starting the video side of the business, I bought the camera and then it wasn't cheap. And then I realized that the camera wasn't really like the barrier to entry, because then I had to learn how to expose properly to get a decent image out of the camera. I had to go buy the lenses, and lenses can cost as much as the camera. And I needed lights as well. So you sort of take your first step into a world and realize actually you're kind of falling off a cliff, and there's a lot more there than you realize. And so, of course, if you kind of think about it from an accountant or bookkeeper's perspective, they take one step into this world, suddenly realize it's 10 times bigger or harder than it was, and they pump the brakes. It kind of makes sense. Um, Also, from the vendor side as well, I think there are misplaced expectations there as well, because particularly with people that are newer at building channels out, they'll see an accountant has come to them, and it might be wishful thinking, or they've like scanned the badge or whatever, and they think, great, they're really, really interested. Sometimes they're just polite, and they're not they're not really that interested. And so you start building your channel to service all of those people, which then detracts from the effort that you can give to the ones that are really interested. The other one, the massive, really, really common expectation gap I see with vendors and accounting channels, particularly, is that the accountant or bookkeeper will put one client on and it will work, right? Be a great case study. We fix the problem, happy days. The assumption from the vendor is, well, why wouldn't they now roll this out to everyone? Like, of course they would. Like, it makes logical sense. It's work for one client. Why wouldn't we do it for all? And that misses the point massively, because lots of accountants are funneled towards partner programs when they just want to solve a problem for a client. So they sort of begrudgingly sign up, whether it's they've been funneled that way or they've got the belief that they'll get better support if they do that. But they're really, really interested in solving a problem for one client. And once that's done, they're kind of like they're back to normal. But the vendor takes that as a massive shot in the arm, going, great, we've got this great firm on. They've got 500 clients like this time next year. Like, we'll have everybody there. And you quickly learn once you've been in there that that's not the case. But a lot of people scratch their heads and wonder, well, why is that? And it's because of the intent when that firm is coming in. They're not coming in to always become a partner. They're coming in to solve a problem for one client, because they're actually being reactive. Like, a client's poked them and said, look, I need to do this. They've said, look, I'll go away and find a solution. And then they've come to you. So really managing that qualifying in the first part is massive. So you don't fall foul of this expectation gap from both sides. Um, and so from your side, I guess just managing your own expectations, qualifying properly is better. But for managing the partner side of things, um, and this will be a real theme throughout this session, is it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. It may be your fault if you're overselling how simple it is. Um, but if you want to grow and you want to engage with firms and you want that to be more effective, then you need to find a solution. And so being straight with them up front around saying, well, okay, like probably 50% of your price of entry is going to be the software cost, but the other 50% is going to be a bit of downtime, the pain, the challenge of moving. And look, that might slow some deals down, but at the point that you're still in the sales process, you've got loads more at your disposal to drive urgency. If you don't address this at that point, but you wait until they've signed and then address it, then it's much, 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 much more harder to try and regain that momentum after the sale, because the tension from the sale dissipates. And we'll come on to that a little bit more in a minute. But aside from being open with them, it's also about trying to figure out how you do some of the thinking work for them to make that process as easy as possible. And one example of this is that almost everybody in this space, when they think about onboarding and setup for clients, for accounting firms, sorry, for partner channels, they think about training and they think about, okay, what do we need to do for onboarding? And that will come down to like, what are the buttons that we need to push? How do we invite staff? How do we add clients? How do we get trained and certified? It's all that functional stuff that lives within the product. But very few people think about the larger ecosystem and workflow that this product sits within, and then training the firm on that. Like, very, very few people do that. But also, if you're trying to get firms to recommend clients to you, well, the question is, well, do they have that mechanism? Like, do they have an ability to do that effectively? And if not, that should be part of your onboarding. How do you introduce a client to your product? What are the questions that you should ask? Take some of that work away from them, and that makes that path a lot easier. And we'll come on to this a little bit more in detail in a minute. Oh, well, and here we are. Perfect segue. So, as I mentioned earlier on, so many of these firms fall into this trap, this inertia, because what happens is, as you're going through a sales process, and I know this, I was trained on this, and this is what we used to do. Like, we were trying to sell, or when I was an account manager, is that what you're trying to do as a salesperson, if you're a good salesperson, you're trying to solve problems for people, right? So what you do in the sales process is you're kind of trying to create this positive tension with the accounting firm or the prospect, because you're trying to focus their mind on the problem that they want to solve, and you're almost sort of fighting for attention against all the other things that they've got to do. And so during that, you create this tension, right? Because if you imagine a seesaw, you've got the pain of staying the same versus the pain of moving, and the pain of staying the same is the pain points for the prospect. The pain of moving is the price and the effort and the impact, all the stuff that we've just talked about. And so, by definition, if you've got a sale that has tipped, and you've got over that line where you've got enough positive tension in the deal to get a decision, that starts to dissipate really, really, really quickly once it's done. In the same way that people feel good about themselves or feel better, well, people will feel bad about themselves because of their weight or their health. They will go and sign up at a gym, and then they immediately feel a little bit better because they've taken that step. They haven't solved the problem yet, but they feel a bit better because they've moved forwards. And that's what happens here. So they'll sign up, they'll say, right, okay, we really need to do this. We need to get on with it. We've done it, sigh of breath. Maybe they've done it in time to catch a deal or a break on a promo code or something like that. And that's a really risky point for your engagement with them, because that tension, that stress, that drive and urgency all drops away, or can all drop away. And then you end up with a partner that falls into that stalled bracket. And that's really dangerous. As I said a minute ago, you've got far less tools at your disposal to reignite motivation than you do at the other side of the sales process. You can't really offer them any more discounts, or you don't really want to get into that trap of offering more money off or doing other things. So you really, really need to not let them drop into that gap. And again, because of the proviso earlier on, we're not trying to trick people. We are trying to help them achieve what they already want to achieve. And so that gives us a little bit of ethical license to arrange this in a way that helps them to do that, right? So I'm not saying get them to move because we want something from them. It's to help them not fall into a trap of not achieving what they want. And I mean, there's loads of ways to do this. There's loads of things to think about, and there's loads of things I work with vendors on. But one really simple thing that you can do is just get them an early win, like really early on. So once they start, what is the smallest part of the time to value kind of proposition that you can break off and give them sooner? And what I mean by this is that, especially with accounting products, there's usually a lot of setup required to get to the point where you can run a report, or you can see the result, or you can get the output of a product that then makes you feel like, okay, this is really good. You get to that aha moment, right? It can take a lot of effort to get to that, but you haven't necessarily earned the goodwill to get someone to spend that time to do it. So you end up with a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. And the way out of that is to break off a little bit of value and give that to them as soon as you possibly can. It gives them a little dopamine hit. It reinforces the behaviors they've put in already, and then they will come back and want more. And so you can then create a little breadcrumb trail to keep them moving through that onboarding process and keep them motivated to get to the point where they then get to full value. And hopefully they then see how the product can help them and help their clients. And you've earned the right to start to ask for that to be embedded in a habit and a workflow. So that's really important. Like, break off a tiny bit, get it in soon. Like, do not assume that people, just because they've signed up to a trial or even signed up to the product, are willing to spend loads and loads and loads of time to get the payoff. They probably aren't. They're really busy. So it's on your shoulders to figure out a way around that. So that's a really practical fix that you can take on. So the third one, which this is just my soapbox, right? This is the thing that I've been bashing on about for over 10 years now. And you've probably kind of got the clues for this already. It's just about change management. And let's assume that we've got people that want the product, they see the value, the expectations are right, they understand what they're getting into, all the other things are solved. This is the one that kills so many promising partnerships, because if you don't break out of those old routines and those old habits within that firm, you aren't going to deliver maximum value. Like, logically, if you think about it, you aren't. Like, if they're not going to change how they work, how can they really get the most out of it? And like, I remember examples of this back in the old days of Xero. People would ask us if we had functionality that was inherent to Sage 50 and inherent to desktop systems. So can you enter purchase invoices and on bulk? Well, no, that's not really the point. And what I missed at that point, but now realize, is that we shouldn't have been selling the product. We should have been selling the workflow and saying, well, no, this is the way that you can now operate. And that these are all the things that are now potentially open to you as a result of working in that way. And then we as a product facilitate that. And so what you're looking for as part of that is to create habits, routines, um, and really, that, I mean, that is very, very hard thing to do. But if you don't do it, what's going to happen is either what we've seen here, that they just stall, like there's not enough impetus to really move it forwards, or probably best case scenario, if you don't get habit embedded, is that you just sort of become a little satellite product that just sits on the periphery. So they've got their core workflow and you just sit on the edge. So I love using Lego analogies, but imagine you've got a Lego house and like any Ed Sheeran fans, drop me a note if you like that. But imagine that you are one block in the center, so like a window block, for example, and to get it out, you've got to take the whole thing apart, get the window out, and then put it back together and maybe swap it out with something else. That's a great place to be occupying because you're central, you're integral to that overall structure. If you're one of the roof blocks on the top, then you can just be picked off the top and replaced with something else. And so that gives you quite a few threats if you're a vendor. So firstly, if something better comes along, new, quick upstart that's got AI all over it, it's kind of easy to swap you out and it doesn't create much of a problem for the firm to do that. Secondly, if, and like it's not great, but in reality, prices have to change. People become more price sensitive if you're on the periphery because you're not core to what they're doing. So you can lose more people on price changes. And equally, the other threat is if an established vendor that, say, is the window in that analogy, they decide to start creating roof tiles, then you're in trouble, right? Because it's really easy for them to swap you out with what that other firm is doing. Hopefully, I haven't beat the analogy too far to death there, but you get the point. Like, you want to be in the center of that thing, and for your own benefit, but also for the firm's benefit, because if you are, you're transforming their workflows and you're making things better and like improving how they work. And so again, there's hundreds of things that you can do around this, but one of them is, again, a really common issue that vendors tend to have is that they find their champion in a firm. It'll be someone that wants to drive it. Now that can be really varied. Sometimes it's managing partner, sometimes it's Jimmy the junior, not to be disparaging, but it's just someone that's been sent out to look for tech solutions and that's who you've got. But the problem is that to get real change and real habit adoption, you need a consensus around the business. And there's two reasons for that. One is that one thing I experienced is that my champion would sort of end up being the zero person. And anytime anyone else in the practice had something to do with zero, they just kick it over to the champion. The champion gets overloaded. No one else really touches it. So you're not actually affecting change a bigger way within that partner. You're sort of overloading one person. And there's a limit to how far they can go, of course, but you have to factor in the fact that most firms don't like people doing non-productive work. So you end up in this situation where your champion is probably supporting you in their own time and getting grief for not doing main work. So you've got this inherent conflict there with that person. The other reason it's important to get more people on board within a firm, other than the obvious, right? Everyone in sales knows that if your champion goes, you've lost the deal or whatever. We're not talking about that. That's known. The other thing is that if you're thinking about behavior change, which is what we're talking about here, right? If we're trying to get your product in as a habit and a new workflow as a habit, we need people to change their behavior. And a massive driver of behavior is a social element to it. So this isn't mine. This is the East framework from the Behavioral Insights team. They're part of they're a government department that was created a few years ago in the Cameron government, and they created a body of work around how you change behavior at scale. And it's usually used in kind of public health policy and things like that. So a lot of this stuff was used around COVID. But one of the categories here is socials. Because we're social animals, we've evolved to have a fairly deep-rooted fear of being ostracized and kicked out of the tribe, as it were. You've got like 100,000-year-old wet software running on Mead computers that's just like crashing up against these amazing technological innovations. It's kind of like Jurassic Park in reverse, right? And so what you end up creating if you've only got one champion in a firm is this dynamic where they've got to go against the grain of everybody else. And there's another really useful example of this is the IBM campaign from a good few years ago, where they said nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And the point behind that is that it's a safe bet. And that's how a lot of B2B decision making actually happens. It's not necessarily what is the right thing to do, it's what is going to give me the least chance of being criticized later. How can I cover my own arse? And so if you've only got one person, the risk of any blowback coming to them is fairly substantial. And so they've either got to be very motivated or very driven or very senior and those things to push this through. Which makes it really hard. Eventually, they'll just give up. Or I mean, you don't know, right? All you see is they've stalled and not done anything. So is that because they've given up? Is it because they just can't get traction? What is it? You're a sort of a step away from that, and you can't always get a straight answer from them. So it's worth knowing that that dynamic is there. And the benefit for me personally of having learned about a lot of this behavioral economics and choice architecture and psychology of this over the last couple of years is it's really helped me to understand why what we did at Zero worked. Because you can't necessarily replicate that stuff again now and go, well, let's just do a Zero Con. Well, you can't because it's a different time and whatnot. But ZeroCon was really helpful because we got all of these little single desperados from individual firms and put them in a building. And suddenly the S on the East model here, the social that is working against you to start with, flips on its head. And now you've got a load of people in the same room. You've got loads of social proof. They found their tribe and they're all in a group together. And that gives them renewed motivation. The other massive thing that we saw is when people started bringing their teams to ZeroCon. So you get 3, 4, 5 people from the same team come over. That would then have a massive impact. And it's because of this social element. So the East model is really good, useful to have a look at. It's something that I use when I'm working with vendors. And then the final one, this isn't really a killer, but it's just the last part of my sort of activation wheel is this idea of flying blind. So we've gone through a lot of stuff here that might be impacting your partner's velocity, how well they're able to achieve their outcomes with your product. But it's really, really difficult to know what to change if you don't have any insight or any data, if you don't know what's going on. And so I'd hugely encourage you to spend some time building some systems where you can see what users are doing, and start to map for yourself, what does a good onboarding process look like? Let's look at our best customers that have done great and really got value and really solved their problems. What were the things that they did when they started onboarding? How did they go through that process? Was it one of them? Was it 4 of them? Is there a magic number? And Facebook learned this way back, and it's the 7 friends in 10 days principle. So they learned that if somebody added a total of 7 friends in the first 10 days, or it might be 10 friends in 7 days, I can't remember what it is, one way around or the other, that they would fly as a user. That was sort of the tipping point for them. And so all of their onboarding resource then went to how do we get them to get to this metric? Because then after they've done that, they'll sort of self-support. So it is massively beneficial for you to start to try and figure out how you gather the data to learn what that aha metric is for you. And then that feeds the earlier part of the process where you can start to drive people forwards. Conscious of time, so we'll start to wrap up and I do want to have some time for questions. I have prepared a diagnostic tool. So if this stuff is interesting or if you're finding that people are slowing down and you don't know where to start with trying to speed them back up, you can go ahead and take this sort of self-serve diagnostic tool. It will ask you about 8 questions and then it will come back with some scores on which area in particular of your partner experience is probably the one that's the weakest. And that can help you sort of focus your efforts on that. And afterwards, you'll be invited to book a little call with me to review and debrief that. But that's a free resource that you can go ahead and just start using. And I would strongly recommend that because, like, overall, I think that there's such an enormous amount of value that's locked away in the sort of back end of all of the vendors that have got these wonderful solutions that are available for accountants. And then you've got these accountants and bookkeepers that are the conduit of this value to 6 million small businesses in the UK. And like everybody's got an opinion on how the country's doing at the moment. But one thing that is kind of indisputable is that every time the country has an economic issue, it's always the small businesses that get us through. A massive contributor to GDP. They also can't dodge taxes as much as well, which is probably more of a cynical thing. But if small businesses are successful, we all are successful. Accountants are the linchpin for that. So if we can unlock this value that's just stuck in 50% of our accounting partners, get that through to them, get that to the clients, like everybody gets to win. And I think if we as a collective, as a space, as an industry, can raise the bar in terms of the quality of how we service accountants and bookkeepers, like, it's hard to see how everybody doesn't win from that. So I'm massively passionate about this, and if I can help you in any way, I'd love to, even if it's just a free call to give you a couple of tips and pointers. But yeah, like have a look at the diagnostic, and I'd love to see what stands out for you on there. I hope this has been useful. I hope you can take something away from this to improve your results in your accounting channels, but also crucially improve the experience for your accounting partners as well.